Hey everybody, this is Rosie. Today we'll be sewing the Swoon Frankie Handbag Tote. If you would like to sew along with me, I have an affiliate link in the video description below for you to purchase the pattern. So let's get started. We're going to start with step one, which is the prepping, and I'd like to show you how I've prepared my pieces. As always, you want to read through all of your pattern instructions. This will help you to know what's involved with creating the bag, and it will also give you the opportunity to make any changes that you want to make. I will be sewing on my Juki TL2010Q, and I'm just going to be using a regular all-purpose thread for this project. And the other note of importance is there is a section right down here that tells you exactly how to print out your pattern. Now, I am using 1 1/4 inch hardware. So I've made some adjustments to a few of my pieces. We'll start with the additional pattern pieces that you need to cut out found on page 2. So I'm using cork for my handles, and I have not fused them or interfaced them with anything. And this will be the top side of my handle, and then the underneath side of my handle I'm using cotton quilting fabric, and I have fused some woven fuse to that. Now, instead of cutting out the handles 4 inches wide, I've cut them out 2.5 inches wide. Then right here, this piece of cork will be used for my handle connectors, and again I've cut it out 2.5 inches wide instead of 4 inches wide, and I have not fused. Any cork that you see in my bag has not been fused with any interfacing. And right here I have my strap connectors, which are made from cork, and instead of cutting them out 2 inches by 3 inches, I've cut them out 2.5 inches by 4 inches. Then I have my removable strap, also cork. I've cut it 2.5 inches wide, and this again will be the top of the strap, and the underneath side of the strap will be made from this quilting cotton, and I've cut everything 2.5 inches wide. And then here I have my closer straps. It's just the quilting cotton again, fused with woven fuse, and what you're not seeing here are the lining pocket panels and the bottom support, and I just cut those out as per the instructions. Now I'll go over how I cut the pattern pieces. So since I'm using wider hardware, I had to increase the size of the handle connectors, and I'm using the pattern piece for vinyl handle connectors. So I put it through my printer and I printed it out at 125% of the original pattern, and that will give me enough space to fit my wider handle connectors in there. Then for the pocket panels, I'm using cork for the exterior, and I'm using some quilting cotton for the lining of the panel, and I fused it with woven fuse. And then for the patch pocket, I'm also using cork for the exterior, and I'm using quilting cotton for the lining, and I fused it with woven fuse. And all the cork again has not been fused at all. And then here I have my main panel pieces. Now it's 100% quilting cotton. I have interfaced it with woven fuse, and then I used the pattern piece provided for the fleece to cut out my thermolam, and I fused that onto the back. And it's very nice that she gives you the piece for cutting out your fleece, because it automatically eliminates everything from the seam allowances. And then these would be the lining pieces for the main panel, and on that pattern she wants you to cut that piece 1 inch shorter than the main panel, so make note of that. This piece will be a little bit shorter. Again, it's 100% quilting cotton, and I fused both pieces with woven fuse. And here I have my side panels. It's 100% quilting cotton fabric. I fused both of them with the woven fuse, and then I used the piece that's for the side panel fleece to cut out my thermolam. And this will be my side panel lining pieces, and again the pattern wants you to cut this piece out 1 inch shorter than the side panel for the exterior of the bag, and both of them are lined with woven fuse. And then lastly, these are the pieces that will be used for the bottom of the bag. This piece right here will be for the exterior, and this one up here is for the lining. They've both been fused with woven fuse, and I have not yet fused my stabilizer to my bottom panel. So that's it for the prepping. Let's move on to step 2. This is step 2, which is to create our patch pocket. So the first thing that we want to do is take our lining piece, and we want to add a snap to it. Now the instruction says to add the snap from the right side, but I think it will be easier for you to see what I'm doing without the printed side of the fabric. So the first thing you want to do is take your pattern piece, and on that pattern piece she shows you the placement for your snap. So you want to go ahead and mark that, and I've marked mine here with a little circle. And then I'm using a snap from Clover, and this is the little washer that will hold the snap in place. And it has two slits and a hole in the center. So I'm going to take the hole in the center and I'm going to place it right over the circle that I just drew. And then I'll just take a little pen and mark my 2 slits. Now the other thing is I've also used a little piece of Decovil here, and I fused that on where the snap is going to go just to give it some extra strength. Then what you want to do is take a pair of nice sharp scissors and cut into that little slit. Okay, don't make it too big, just as big as it needs to be. And I like to use a pair of scissors with a really sharp point, because I find that if you're not using a sharp point, the danger of cutting past that opening is pretty great. Now from this side I will take the male snap, which is this piece right here, and I'm going to place that where I put the 2 slits. And if it doesn't go in easily and your slit's a little bit too small, no worries, just go ahead and make it slightly bigger. Then I'm going to take the washer and I'm going to put that right over the prongs of the snap. Then once you have the washer in place, you want to take a hammer and flatten down those prongs. Whether you flatten them both in towards the center or out towards the sides, I don't think it really matters, and I always change the way I do it. And today I feel like hammering them out towards the sides. So I'll finish doing that, and after that we're going to sew the lining piece to our exterior. So I have my snap in place, and one thing you could do if you like is you can put a piece of fleece, fuse a piece of fleece over this back end of your snap. So our next step is to take the front panel, which is my cork, and we're going to clip these together, and we'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from the edge all around this piece here. Here's my piece all clipped together and ready to be sewn. Make sure that all of your edges are nice and even when you do your clipping, and just put in as many clips as you're comfortable with. Now I'm going to start sewing 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and on my sewing machine the distance from the needle to the edge of the press-a-foot is approximately 1/4 of an inch. It's probably more like a scant 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 2.5. Now when you get to this little part right here, where there's that little sort of turn, you want to stop and pivot. And then you'll sew around the curve. Now when you're sewing around a curve, just go slow. If you go slow, then you don't have to keep stopping and trying to readjust your presser foot. So the sharper the curve, the slower I go. And it just turns naturally, and you'll get a smoother line than if you stop and try and pivot and readjust. Now when I'm getting to this little corner here again, I'm going to stop and pivot. And you want to backstitch at both ends. Now that I have my seam sewn, I'm going to clip around my curve all around here. I want to clip right in where that pivot is. I'll go to the iron and I'm going to iron this seam back from the cotton side. Now I don't want to iron on my cork, so I will just iron this side back and then we'll go and turn everything right side out. So here's my piece with the seam allowance pressed open. Now when I did my clips, I did clip through both the cotton and the cork. So now I'm just going to turn it right side out. Now that I have everything turned inside out, I want to roll these seams between my fingers. You kind of want to have both the lining side and the cork side both equally showing. You don't want to have it, you know, like this or like this, okay? They need to be together right at the edge. And you can do this all the way around with your fingers, and then you can also take a tool like a point turner. I like to use the rounded edge. And you can get this in here and you can roll it right along that curve, and that will help also to push it out. And then you can roll it some more with your fingers. So I'm going to finish doing that, and then when I'm done, I'm going to give it a really good pressing from the lining side, and then we'll go over to the machine and we're going to top stitch all around the outside edge. Now I have everything pressed down very nicely, so what I want to do now is do a top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And for me on my sewing machine, if I focus on the center of the toe right here, the distance between this toe and my needle is approximately 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to be using the center of the toe as my guide for my 1/8 inch top stitching. And I'm going to top stitch with a stitch length of 3.0. You do want to back stitch at both ends. And again, when you get to that little turn that's right there, you want to pivot. And the same thing goes as you're going around the curve, just go slow. And if you go slow enough, you won't have to stop and readjust. It's when you readjust that you don't get a smooth line. And the sharper the curve, the slower you go. I am guiding with my hand, but because I'm going slow, the feed dogs are actually doing part of the work for me. So I'm not like forcing it. And again, as I come up to that little turn there, I'm going to pivot again. And back stitch at the end. Now we want to sew that pocket flap to one of the main panels. So I have the main panel here, and what I did is I marked a line right down the center with my chalk wheel. And all I did to do that was place the pattern piece right here on top of the main panel, and where the fold line is on that pattern piece, that is your center line. So I just chalked a line down that way, and then I marked another line perpendicular to my center line that's 2 3/4 up from the bottom. Then you need to take your flap and you need to find the center of the bottom of the flap, and I have it indicated right here with a little black mark. Now you might want to note that in the pattern she wants you to fold under these edges, so fold in both the edge of the exterior and the lining by 1/4 of an inch. You would tuck it in 1/4 of an inch and sew it. Because I'm using cork, I didn't want to have any kind of bulk showing through the pocket that's going to be going over this, so all I did was stitch it closed. I did not turn it under. Now I'm going to match that mark up with this little crosshair right here. So the edge of my pocket is going to be on that 2 1/4 inch line. Okay, and here is my black mark lined up with the chalk line. And then up here at the top, the center of the snap would be where the center of the bag is. So you can see right here, I have my snap right here, and here is my chalk line up here. So that's all centered. Now all I need to do is pin it in place, and we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew right over your previous top stitching. So we'll sew right from here, down the side, across the bottom, and then up this side again, and you'll back stitch with that stitching on both ends. Okay, so here we are, and I am going to drop my needle in right where I pivoted when I sewed in the top stitching. So I'll drop my needle in there, and this is going to be a little bit of a stress point, so I'm going to back stitch over it a couple of times. So I'll just go a few stitches forward, backwards. I just want to make sure that that will be a secure point. And I'm just stitching right over that previous line of top stitching. When I get to the bottom, I'll pivot. And again, I'm sewing with that same stitch length of 3.0 when I did my top stitching. And when I get to the point right here again where I pivoted that first time, that's where I'm going to end. Now I'm ready to attach the female part of the snap to the pocket, and this time it's going to be attached to the exterior, and that's my piece of cork. So I've fused a little piece of Decoville here just to strengthen the area where the snap is going to go. And I know that I say that I never fuse anything to my cork, but in this case I do that because it does need to have a little bit of extra strength because of those prongs that are going through the fabric. Now I did the same thing I did last time. I just laid the pattern piece down on to this exterior piece here, and I marked the placement according to where it is on the pattern for the snap. Then I'm going to take the washer part of the snap and put it right over that little circle that I drew. Okay, and then I will just mark both legs of the snap. Okay, and then I'm just going to cut just a little tiny slit where my markings are. Okay, just make sure that's long enough. Again, like I said before, you need to have a good sharp pair of scissors when you're doing something like this. Dull scissors is what makes you slip and make the hole bigger than it should be. Okay, and then from the right side, I want to insert those prongs into the two slits that I just made. Okay, and then I'll put the washer on the back, and I will hammer the legs down the same way I did before. And then after they're hammered, if you want to go ahead and put a little bit of fleece to cover up those prongs, that's perfectly fine to do too. And now that I have my prongs hammered down, I'm just going to take my lining piece and line the two pieces up with edges matching. I'm going to clip all the way around, and then when I'm done clipping, we'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew around this little curve here, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. So here's my pocket all clipped together, the lining with the exterior. We're going to sew all the way around the curve, and then when we're done sewing, we're going to turn it right side out, just like we did with the flap. And this time I will be folding in the top edge. Now the pattern says to do it 1/4 of an inch, but I'm doing mine 3/8 of an inch. And the reason why is because it's a little harder to work with a more narrow seam when you're using cork. So I'm just going to do 3/8 of an inch, and that'll help me out a little bit when I'm trying to turn under the cork. So to help me do that also, I've gone and I have folded just the lining piece under 3/8 of an inch, and that will help me later to line everything up when I'm going to turn it under. Now we're going to start up here at the top edge, and you don't want to sew down that fold, you just want to sew right from the top, and we're going to back stitch, and I'm using a stitch length of 2.5. And then just like before, when you're trying to go around the curve, just go slow. And back stitch at the end. Now that I have that done, I'm going to go and clip all my curves just like I did before. You always want to make sure that you don't clip through your seam line there, through your stitching. Just clip as close as you can. And then I'm going to turn it right side out and press everything down. So here's what the pocket looks like now. I did clip through both the cork and the lining, and then I just pressed back the seam allowance of the lining. And now I'm going to turn it right side out. I have everything turned right side out and pressed, and I pressed from the lining side. And then I turned under the lining 3/8 of an inch and the cork 3/8 of an inch, and I'm holding it with some clips, and now we're just going to top stitch along that top edge 1/8 of an inch away from the top with a stitch length of 3.0. And back stitch at both ends. Okay, now I'm ready to place the pocket onto the main panel and sew it down. First off, I have a little bit of a dilemma because this is cork and I don't want to pin through my cork to hold this in place while I'm sewing. So instead I'm going to be using some of this purple crafter's tape, and that should hold it down well enough while I'm sewing it. Now there is a pocket placement piece that you can lay down on here. You would trace around the pocket placement piece and that would tell you where to put your pocket. But I'm not going to use that. The top of the pocket needs to be 5 inches down from the top. So I've marked a chalk line 5 inches down from the top there, and I know that that's where the edges of the pocket have to go, the top edge. And then it needs to be centered side to side. So all I'm going to do is take my ruler and measure out from each side, from the top edge of the pocket right here to the side, to see if I get the same measurement on both sides. Okay? And then once I know that the pocket is centered, I'm going to tape it down in place. And of course I will not sew over the tape. I'll remove it just before I get to the spot where I need to sew. And then the other thing I want to make sure of is that my snap is lining up. Okay? If it's skewed a little bit, then it's going to make the flap either go this way or that way, depending on how far this is skewed from the center. So you just want to make sure that it closes easily and that everything looks nice and centered. And then you'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch all around the curve here. Okay, I'm ready to sew the pocket in. And again, I want to back stitch over here a few times because that again will be a stress point. And I'm using a stitch length of 3.0. I'll pull the tape off. Again, go slow around your curves. This tape is also reusable. You can use it a few times before it won't stick anymore. And again, back stitch over this part a few times. And there you go, pocket's all sewed down. Now we're starting step 3A, which is handles. So we're going to start by creating our handle connectors. So I'm taking the piece that I cut out for the connectors and I scored a line straight down the center of that piece with my pen. Okay? And now I'm just going to take a piece of adhesive tape and put a piece on each side of that line. And right now I'm actually using some crafting tape. It's called score tape. And it's very strong and I find that it holds really well. Once I have that in place, I'm just going to take off the paper. So now that I have the paper off of one side, I'm going to fold my long edge into that line that I drew down the center, and I'm just going to press it in. Okay, I find actually that this holds better than the one that they sell for sewing purposes. Okay, and then I'll take the paper off of the other side and do the same thing. I'm going to fold those long edges right into the center. Okay, and make sure that it's pressed down nicely. Now, I'm going to go over to the machine, and I'll do this off camera. All I'm going to do is top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from each long edge. Now that I've done my top stitching, I'm going to cut this into 4 2.5 inch long pieces. So I'll just take my ruler, all right, and then you'll cut 4 pieces the same length, and you'll take your hardware and you're going to slip the strap connector into the hardware, and you're going to baste right along here, right along the edge there, but you want this part right here, the part that's sticking out, to be 1/4 of an inch longer than the other side. So just take your ruler and make sure that you have 1/4 of an inch there. And then I just secure it with some Wonder Clips. Okay, and then I'll go over to the sewing machine and baste this in right along that edge right there. So here's one of my strap connectors all ready to be stitched down, and one end, this end is 1/4 of an inch longer than this end here, and I'm going to baste right along this edge. Now, one thing I like to do when I'm sewing something like this together, because it has a tendency to shift, I will start the piece away from the edge, and then I just drop my needle in. And then I'll take a few stitches forward, and then I'll go back, and then I finish stitching across. And that really prevents everything from shifting, so your edges will stay nice and even. So you need to go ahead and make 4 just like this. So here are the handle connectors. They're all done. That's what they look like on each side. And now we're ready to prepare the handles. So I have prepared my handles differently. I'm actually going to use the cork for the top of the handle, and then I'm going to use a quilting cotton for the underside of the handle. So on both of these pieces I did the same thing I did before. I drew a line straight down the center of both of these pieces. The quilting cotton is about 2 inches less in length than my cork. And then you'll take your paper off of your tape, and just like before, we're going to fold everything into the center. Okay? And you're going to do that on this piece and on this piece. Now, if you're using this tape, or really any adhesive tape, for what I'm doing right here, you want to stay about 1 inch below the edges of the handles. Okay? That's because we're going to be sewing this piece to this piece, and we don't want to be sewing through the tape. And in general, when you're using this tape or any other tape, don't put this tape anywhere where you're going to be sewing. Okay? So you're going to go ahead and fold all of these edges in towards the center. All right? And then I've already done that over here. So you can see I have, this is my cork piece all folded in towards the center, and here is the underside of the handle all folded in towards the center. Then the next thing you'll want to do is open up the ends, all right, on both pieces, on the cork and the cotton piece, and clip it in place. Okay, and then I'm going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew this across with either 1/4 of an inch or a 1/2 inch seam. It's up to you how wide you want to make your seam there. So I'm going to go do that right now off camera. So now I have the ends stitched together on both sides of the handle, and once I've done that, then I'm just going to fold everything back towards the center. I'm going to secure it down with a couple of little clips here. Okay, and once you get that nice and neatly secured, Then you're going to put the wrong sides together, and the wrong sides are going to be the sides that have been folded towards the center. You want those to be together, and your cork will overlap a little bit to the wrong side, and that's what you want it to do. And you're going to clip the two pieces together all along the length, okay? And then after you have it clipped together, you'll go over to the sewing machine and you're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edges on all four sides here. Here's the handle now all clipped into place with the cork on the top and the quilting cotton on the bottom. And you can see that the cork does overlap to the wrong side, or the cotton side of the handle. And what it does there is it gives you a nice finished edge. Okay? So go ahead and do your top stitching. We will do that off camera. And here's the handle all top stitched. I used a stitch length of 3.0. Now, you want to take your connectors here and you're going to slip the end of the handle into the other side of the connector, okay? And the shorter end that you basted in right here should be on the same side as this tab right here that's being folded in, okay? So it should look like this. And now you could either go ahead and sew that down, or you could do rivets, and I'm actually going to do rivets, so I'm not going to do any sewing with this right now. I'm just going to put it in place, and then I'll go and add in some rivets later on. So put one connector on each end. Oh, wrong way. Okay, and you want to fold this over for as much as needed to either do the rivets or your sewing. Okay, and then that's what you should have right now. Both of my handles are done, and I've set in the rivets. So now what I need to do is place these handles on each side of the main panels, both the front and back main panel. So you can either use the pattern piece, which shows you where the placement is, and mark it that way, or you can just measure. So I've chosen to measure. Now I have some chalk lines here. This line right here is measured 2 3/4 inch down from the top, and I scored or chalked my line all the way across 2 3/4 inches down from the top. Then from this spot right here, right where this line ends, I measured in 2 inches. So I just placed my ruler down and I measured in 2 inches. My 2-inch mark is right here, and I chalked this line here. And since my handles are 1 1/4 inch wide instead of 1 inch wide, I just marked 1 1/4 inches away from this chalk line, and I drew this line right here. And then I did the same thing on this side. Measuring right here, from right here, I measured 2 inches in, and I chalked the line. And then from this line, I measured over another 1 1/4 inches, and I chalked the second line. So now I have 2 little boxes, one here and one here, and these connectors, the bottom of the connector will sit right here on top of this chalk line and in between these 2 chalk lines. So just like that, okay? So you'll have that one there, and then you'll have this one right over here. And then you're going to go over to the sewing machine and you're just going to baste these in place. Okay? So go ahead and do that, and you also want to make the same markings on the back panel so that you can connect the handle onto the back side of the bag. So here I am at the sewing machine, and here's my first little square with my chalk lines. I'm just going to take one of the handles and make sure that it's fitting inside of that box there. Okay? There really is no easy way to secure this down. So I'm just going to slide it over to my presser foot and I'm going to drop the needle down. That's going to hold it in place for me. And then I'm just going to take a few stitches forward and then back, and then I'll sew across to the other side and back stitch it. Okay, so that's one side of the handle sewn in. So now you want to sew in the other side. Make sure that nothing is twisted here. You know, you don't want to be like twisting it and then sew it down. Make sure that it's all curving around nicely with no twists in there. Now I'm on to step 3C, which is to create the handle connectors. And since I'm using cork, I'm using the handle connector for the vinyl. Now remember, I had to make mine larger because my straps are 1 1/4 inches wide, so I just printed it out at 125%. And that gives me just enough for my connectors to fit in. So this is what I did. I obviously first went and cut out my pieces. I have 2 that are completed here. And after I cut it out, all my 4 pieces, I took this piece and I folded back on the dotted lines. Okay? Just like that. And then I turned my pieces over and I fit this into the piece of cork that I cut. All right? And then I took a pen and I just traced around the edges here. Okay, once I had that traced into place, I took some of that tape and I put down a few pieces of tape. You want to keep this out of the stitching line, and the stitching line is going to be where you top stitch these down onto the bag 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Okay, and then you're going to peel off the paper. And then after all of the paper is peeled off, you're going to fold where you have those lines, and you'll be able to tell where you're folding pretty well. Okay, so you're going to fold it in and let it stick to that tape. Then I'm going to fold in this side, and the 2 edges here should just about meet. All right, then I'll fold in the bottom one, and again all those edges should meet. Okay, if they don't meet exactly, you can finagle it a little bit so that they do meet. Okay, then I'm going to fold this side in. And then I'll fold the last one in. Okay, and then when you turn it over, you should have the correct shape, okay, for your connector. So I'm going to go in and fiddle with this just a little bit more to get it to look a little more perfect, but that's basically the process I did to make the connectors. Okay, now I have all these connectors done and we're ready to put them onto the front panel. So here's my front panel, and you want to take each one, and it's going to go approximately a 1/2 inch down from the top of this connector right here. Okay, so I'm going to put some of that tape on the back of these connectors and secure it in place. And once you have it all secured, we'll go over to the machine. You're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edges all the way around. Okay? Okay, so let's try sewing down this connector. I'm going to start by dropping my needle down, and I'm stitching with a stitch length of 3.5. So first I'll go across here. I'm really stitching as close to the edge as I can possibly get. Okay, and then I'm just going to go and stitch around it one more time. So I have all the connectors done on both the front and the back, and I just stitched 1/8 of an inch around the edges, and I went around twice, and then when I finished the second pass I went across the top a third time, and then I back stitched. Now we're on step 4, which is the side panels. So you want to take your strap connectors, and the first thing I did, just as we've done all along, is I've drawn a line straight down the center of my connector. Then I put some double-sided adhesive tape on both sides of the line, and I folded the edges in towards the middle. So you're folding the long edge in towards the middle. And I have this one here that's already done. And once you have this piece prepared, you're going to take your D-ring and slide it onto the end of the connector, okay? And then you'll fold these ends in towards the center. Now, I like to have this end a little bit longer than this end. And the reason why I do that is because I want to have enough room to be able to stitch next to my D-ring and have a rivet in there. So I'm going to be putting a rivet here and a rivet here on the bottom side, okay? And then to hold that all in place, I'm just going to take a little bit of tape, and I'm just going to put it over the center there. You'll just pull your paper off, and after you've pulled off the paper, you'll put the D-ring back on and fold in towards the center. And then I'm going to put one more piece of tape on here because I want the tape, I want to be able to use the tape to secure this to my side panel and hold it in place for me as I'm sewing. Alright, so now you'll take one of your side panels right there, and you need to find the center of the side panel, and the easiest way to do that is take the pattern piece and lay it down on top of the panel, and the fold line right here is your center. So I just took a chalk wheel and I marked the center with the chalk wheel. Okay, and hopefully you can see where I have that line right there. And then I took my ruler and I marked 4.5 inches down from the top, and I drew another chalk line perpendicular to my center line. And then you'll take the anchor with the D-ring on it, and you're going to place it so that the center of the anchor is right at this cross here, right here, okay? So you want that to be centered. And then I'll take the tape off and I'll secure it with the tape to hold it in place while I'm sewing. And we're going to sew a box around here. We're going to sew across, down, across, up. And then I like to go over mine twice. And then when I get back to the top after I've made my second pass, I will go over this line here again a third time. Now I'm going to start sewing the strap connector to the side, and I just want you to see right here, this is my center line, and this is the line that I drew 4.5 inches from the top that's perpendicular to the center line. the fold of this connector is sitting right on that line, right there, right on that perpendicular line. So we're going to get this into the machine. Okay, you don't want to go too close to that D-ring. You need to be able to have your presser foot be able to maneuver around that D-ring. I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 3.5, and I'll stitch across first. And you want to get about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and then you'll pivot. You can take one more stitch. We'll sew down this side. Okay, now I'm going to go around a second time. And now that I've finished my second pass, I'm just going to go across the top one more time. And then I'll back stitch a couple of stitches. Okay, and now for extra security, I'm just going to go and put in 2 rivets. I'll put one around here and one right around here, just below those stitching lines. And of course the rivets are optional. So here are my side panels with the connectors sewn in and the rivets are in. So now the next thing we need to do is create the closure straps. So I have them right here, and we're going to do the same thing we've been doing all along. Just draw a line right down the center, fold the long ends in towards the center. Then once you've done that, you're going to take a D-ring and you're going to slip it on one end of the closure strap. Okay, and you'll fold this in half with the raw edges together at the ends right there. Okay, and then you can clip that together with a few wonder clips. And then on the other strap, you're going to take your swivel clip and you're going to, again, put it on there, fold it in half with the raw edges together. All right, and now we'll go over to the sewing machine. We're going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, up one side, across, and down the other side. And then we will attach these to our side panels. So I have one of the closure straps right here, and it's been folded in half, and I've clipped them together, and you want to fold it with these long raw edges facing each other. Okay, now I'm just going to put it into my machine. I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 3.0, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. You can back stitch. Again, you want to go as close as you can get to the D-ring and still be able to maneuver your presser foot comfortably. I'm going to sew across, and right here I'm actually going to back stitch over that, because that will be a little bit of a stress point there. And then I'm going to pivot and sew down the other side. And you want to do the same thing with the other closure strap, the one that has the swivel hook on it. Then the next thing that you'll do is you'll take one of your side panels, and this is going to be sewn onto the side panel here, right along the top. So you'll have these edges meeting, okay, the raw edge of the closure strap to the top edge of the side panel, and you want to center it. So I have my white chalk mark right over here. It's a little bit faint now, but it's right here. You want to have this closure strap centered right over that line, okay? So there you go, and then you're just going to sew it, or baste it I should say, at 1/4 inch. And I do like to go over this a couple of times. Now you'll do the same thing with the other closure strap. You're going to secure it to the other side panel. Now we're on step 5, which is lining pocket. Now, the first thing that I wanted to do is find the center. In the pattern instructions, she just tells you to fold the piece in half and press, but I like to use a line, so I've drawn a line down the center, and again, all I did was put my pattern piece down, and where the fold of the pattern is, that is your center. Now, you may have noticed, I just want to make a quick comment here that I've been using a friction pen for my marking. I'm using a friction pen because it shows up easily on the videos. I would never mark a bag that I'm making for personal use or for sale with a friction pen. And the reason why is because even though these marks will disappear with heat, they also come back with cold. So there is a chance that this mark can come back at some point. So just know that I'm only doing it for the purposes of the video. Now I have my center marked here. This is the top, and what I want to do is draw a line 2.5 inches down from the top here, because what we're doing is we're creating the window for our zipper. Okay? So this is 2.5 inches down from the top, and then from there I need to draw another line that's 1/2 inch down from the line that I just drew. Okay, now we want this window to be a 9-inch opening, so we're going to measure 4.5 inches out from the center on both sides. Okay, and you'll just draw a little line on both sides. Okay, so that's the box that I'm going to be sewing around for my zipper. And you'll start wherever you want, but you're going to be sewing around the entire box. Okay? What I also like to do is make a mark for where this box will be cut open. So, right 1/4 inch, right down the center of the box. So this line here is 1/4 inch from both this line and this line. And then I'll just draw a little arrow right here from this line going into the corners. Okay, so there's your box. Now we're going to flip this over to the right side, and we're going to mark 1.5 inches down from the top. Now for this side, I'm not going to use that friction pen. I'll use the chalk pen, my chalk wheel I should say. And now that I have that chalk line drawn, I want to take one of my pocket panel pieces, which is right here, and I want the edge of this pocket panel to be right up to the edge of my chalk line. Okay, so this is 1.5 inches down from the top here. And then you also should have it centered, and what you can do is just take your ruler and see if you have about the same amount of space on each side. Okay, so I can move mine over just slightly. Okay. All right. Now, what I like to do is just take this piece and just very carefully flip it over, and then just to hold it in place while I'm sewing, I'm just going to put in a few pins. And then if you want to make sure that it didn't shift out of place when you flipped it over, you can just go ahead and flip it back and check it. Okay, now I'm going to sew my box, and I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 2.0. I like to use a really short stitch length when I'm doing something like this. So you just want to drop your needle down right on that line, and you're just going to follow the line. Make sure that your needle stays on the line so that you get a nice square, crisp box. Okay? You don't need to backstitch yet. The most important thing is staying on that line. Okay, now I'm going to pivot. I'm going to sew down the side here. Okay, and now I will sew down the other length here. I think I'm going to take one more stitch. Okay, we'll sew up this side. Now we'll go back to our starting point, and we'll stitch right over that previous line of stitching and a couple of back stitches. Now I'm ready to cut this box open, and I'm just going to cut along the lines and on the lines where the arrows are. So I like to just start it out by folding it in half, okay, and just making a little cut, all right? And then once I've done that, I can get my scissors in there easily, all right? I'm just going to cut along that line. And then you want to stop where you have the point of that arrow, and then you're going to clip in up to your line of stitching, but make sure that you don't go through your line of stitching, okay? Get as close as you can. And this is another time where it helps to have a really nice sharp pair of scissors. You want them to be sharp right up to the point. Okay, and then you're going to go ahead and clip this side too. Then after your box is cut open, you're going to go over to your iron, and you will iron back the seam on both sides. Okay, so iron everything open, okay, then flip it over and iron it open this way. The tabs here, when you iron them, you want them to be going this way, okay? So you're going to iron them open, and this side of the triangle will be ironed to this side, and then the other side of the triangle will be ironed to the other side of the panel, okay? So go ahead and iron everything down. So I have the seams of my box all pressed open, and I'm going to turn that pocket lining to the wrong side here, but before I do, I like to just place a little bit of fray check in each one of those corners. You don't have to do this, but it's just a little bit of extra insurance, and I actually will do that to both sides. Okay, and then once you're done doing that, you're just going to take this and push it through the opening. Okay, and you'll pull it to the opposite side. Okay, and the triangles that are under here, you want to pull them out this way. Okay, so they want to point, those tips of the triangles want to point that way. And then once you're done, you'll go over to the iron and press all of this down nice and neatly. Now I have my window all pressed down nicely, and I'm ready to put in my zipper. Now you can secure the zipper in however you like. You could use pins to hold it in place, or you can use tape, whatever. I like to use the tape. My tape is actually a little bit too wide. I don't have any very thin tape right now. So what I've done is I've used the wider tape, but I'm letting it hang off of the edges there. Because when I pull off the paper, I don't want any of the adhesive from the side of the tape to be showing through the window. So I'm just going to pull off the paper from both sides, and I'm going to place the window over the zipper. And you just want to get it to be as centered as you possibly can. It's always hard to do with the camera in the way. Okay, so get it nice and centered. Now, you're going to notice that my zipper pull is outside of the range of the window. And that's okay, because what I'm going to do is sew along the length, down the side, and down this length. And before I sew this end up, I will push that zipper tab through the little opening that's still going to be here before I sew it closed, and I'll push it in. I like to do it that way because the zipper pull adds bulk in here, and it's sometimes hard to maneuver around it when you're at the sewing machine. Now I'm ready to sew the zipper in place, and I'm just going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge here, and I'm going to use this toe, the center of this toe of my foot, as my guide. And I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 2.5. And I will not backstitch yet. Now you may be wondering, because I let that adhesive tape overlap here a little bit, this tape is hitting the bed of my machine, but it's not enough to cause anything to be hung up. You can see it's still going through my machine nicely. It is better to use the proper size tape, but I just didn't have any. Going to about 1 or 2 stitches past the side here. And now I'm going to sew across the side. And I do like to backstitch over this part, because it will be a stress point. Okay, now we'll sew along this lane. Now that I'm getting to this end, I'm going to lift up my presser foot, and I'm just going to take the zipper pull right here, and I'm just going to push it. And I'll push it right through the window there. And back stitch right here on the end. Okay, and one more stitch. And now when I get back to my original stitching over here, I'm just going to go over it a few stitches and then a few stitches back. Okay, and there is the zipper in your window opening. So here's the zipper, and now what you want to do is just trim off these edges here. So trim on both sides. And that extra tape that I have here hanging over, you don't want that to stay on there if you're like me and didn't have the right size tape. You can just pull it and it will actually just come right off. Okay? Now that we have everything in place with our zipper, we're going to sew the other side of the pocket lining to this piece right here. And we're only going to be sewing up the side, across the top, and down the bottom, because later on we'll be turning the bag through the pocket. So you want to keep this side open. So just go ahead and clip your sides together, and then we'll go over to the sewing machine and sew it down. Now I'm going to sew the two pocket linings together, and I like to sew it with my lining side up, not so, in other words, not this way with the lining on the bed of the machine. I like to sew it with the pocket on the bed of the machine. That way I know for sure I'm not sewing through my lining. So I have everything clipped. This is the bottom of the pocket right here, and that's the part we're going to leave open. We're going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam, and I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.5. Okay, I'm going to pivot. Make sure my lining is folded out of the way. This doesn't have to be perfect or pretty. The most important part is that your side seams are even and that they're sewn at a 1/2 inch. Along this top here, doesn't really matter. Okay, so now the pocket pieces are sewn together and the bottom of the pocket is left open. We're on step number 6, which is the male turn lock. Now she has two different ways of doing this. I'm doing the first way she talks about. I'm not doing the alternative closure. So I have the male part of my twist lock right here. And what we need to do is center it right on these cross marks. So this line here is 2.5 inches down from the top, and then this is just the center mark. And the twist lock will get placed right in the center of those marks. Now you get a washer with the lock, and that's what's going to hold it in place. So first of all, you need to see which of these slots this will fit into. So if I put it in here, I can see that on both sides my particular lock is going one in from each side. So one slot in from each side. Okay? So that's what it looks like this way and this way. Now, this actually goes in pretty much the same way that we put in the magnetic snaps, but what I've done is I've actually also made the same markings on the wrong side. And by the way, you're putting this on the back of the bag, not the front. And the reason why I did that is because I think it'll be easier for you to see on the camera. So you want to take your washer, okay, and the little circle in the middle, that is going to go right at that crosshairs. So you can see the crosshair mark right here. You have these lines going this way and this way. There's the crosshair. I want that circle to go right on the crosshair right there. And then I'm just going to take my marking pen and I'm going to color in those slits on each side. Alright, so this is where I need to make little snips into the fabric. So again, I'm just going to take my very sharp pointy scissors and just snip just as much as I need for those prongs to fit through. Okay? Be careful you don't poke yourself. You don't want to slip and go too far. Alright? Also, I do have a piece of Decoville here which will strengthen that area where the prongs are going to go. Now I'm going to take the lock. I'm just going to fit it right into those slits. And if your slit is a little bit too small, then all you need to do is go and snip them a little bit wider. Then I'm going to take the washer and I'm going to place it right over those prongs. And then I'm going to take the hammer and hammer these prongs down. I'm going to hammer mine out towards the outer edges. And then after I have it all hammered down, I'm going to take another piece of Decoville and I'm going to fuse that over the lock. Okay? And that will just prevent anything that may be pointy from sticking through the fabric. So I'm going to go hammer this off camera. So now I have my lock installed and I did fuse a piece of Decoville to the back side to cover up the hardware. Now we're on to step number 7, which is assembly. So you want to start with either the front or back panel, and we're going to sew the bottom panel to each side of these main panels, both front and back. So you're going to put them right sides together, and then you'll clip them. And then you'll want to go over to your sewing machine and you're going to sew across this bottom panel with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to use a stitch length of probably 2.5 because I really don't have anything bulky. I have just my quilting cotton with the woven fuse on both sides. The interfacings are out of my seam allowances. So you can go ahead and clip this together. I'm going to sew this off camera because it's just a simple seam straight across with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here's the bottom panel sewn to both the front and back main panels, and it's just a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides, and then I pressed my seam allowances in towards the center. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the machine and I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch top stitching away from the seam line, and the top stitching is actually going to be on the bottom panel, not on the main panels here. So again, I'm going to go and do this off camera because there's nothing fancy here. You're just going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line on both sides of the bottom panel. So here's my bottom with the top stitching, and this is what it looks like on this side. So these seams again have been pressed in towards the center of the bottom, and the inner line of stitching is the top stitching from the other side. So now we're ready to put in our side panels. So first thing that you want to do is find the center marks of your bottom. So I have a mark right here in black, and then the other one is right here. Those are my center marks. And I've also marked the center of this panel with a black mark right here. So what I want to do is match up those marks, okay? So you're going to pin in one side at a time, and just going to match up those marks right there. And I'm going to use a binder clip to hold it in place. Okay? I like to use the binder clips at a few key points because they're nice and strong. And then I'm going to take this end of the side and I'm going to match up the top edge of the side panel with the top edge of the bag. All the edges meeting nicely. And I'm going to put another binder clip in there. Okay, make sure everything is nice and straight. And then the other end of the side panel will get clipped to this side of the bag at the top edge. Also using a binder clip. You want to really take your time to make sure that all of your edges are well lined up. Okay, and now from here I'm just going to go ahead and clip all down the length, and I'll just use some of my regular clips for this. I will be sewing this from this side of the panel. And you'll be sewing with a seam allowance of 1/2 inch. And again, I will use a stitch length of 3.0. When I did the top stitching down here on the bottom panel, I used a stitch length of 3.0. Now as you get to the bottom, this curve is not that dramatic, so what you want to do is clip up to where the curve starts, and then to ease it in, I like to cup everything around my fingers. Okay, so I'm kind of cupping this way, and that helps to ease in that seam there. Again, I always take a lot of time on this. Okay, so it should be laying in there nice and flat on both sides. All right, then you'll just go ahead and clip down the other side and we'll be ready to sew. This is my second side panel all clipped in, and I just want to show you what the curve looks like here. I always use a lot of clips around my curve, and as I'm clipping, sometimes I will cup it around my fingers this way, and sometimes I'll cup it around my fingers this way as I'm clipping. But you can see that everything just lays in there very nicely. Everything's flat with no puckers. That's how it should be. And this is what it looks like from the other side. Okay? So same thing. Everything is laying in there nice and flat with no puckers. Okay, so we're ready to start sewing. I'm at a stitch length of 2.5, and I'm sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So start, back up. I'm going to take this first clip out. So right now, this sewing down the side is more or less just a straight seam. Now, as you get to the curve, you'll be sewing a little bit slower. And you just want to make sure that everything is staying nice and flat on both the side panel and on the bottom and on the main panels. So you can shift things around and you can get your hand underneath in between and smooth everything out under there. When you're sewing in these gussets, the sharper the curves and the more structure that you have built into the bag, the harder it is to sew around these curves. But the secret is go slow. And if you need to have some more reinforcement in there, either using the binder clips instead of the Wonder Clips or some staples, that's fine too. There's not a ton of structure in this bag, so I can get by with just the Wonder Clips and a few binder clips. And you can see I keep readjusting. And I do keep putting my hand underneath just to make sure that everything under here feels like it's flat. And I can see that my side panel is flat. So readjust as much as you feel that you need to. Putting my hand underneath again just to make sure it's all flat under there. And now I'm on the straightaway again. Okay, now I'm just going to go check my seam. I'm going to make sure that I don't have any puckers anywhere in here. And if I'm happy with it, I'll trim down this seam to probably about 1/4 of an inch. And once you're done with this side, you'll put in the other side panel. So now I have my side panel sewn in, and I've trimmed all my seams down to 1/4 of an inch. So next we're going to move on to constructing the lining. So I have one of the lining pieces here. It's the one with the pocket, obviously, and this is the bottom. We're going to do the same exact thing as we did before. We're going to sew the bottom panel to each side of the linings. Then when we have that done, we're going to go ahead and set in the side panels onto the lining. Now, there's no need to leave any openings in your lining because we're not turning the bag through the lining. We're going to turn the bag through the pocket. So just go ahead and construct this exactly the same way that you did for the exterior of the bag. So I just want to show you that I did start assembling my lining. As I said before, you're going to do this exactly the way you did for the exterior. I have both main panels of the lining here, side with the pockets here, with the bottom panel sewn in the middle. So I sewed it with 1/2 inch seam, just like I did for the exterior, and I pressed those seam allowances towards the center of the bottom, and then I did do some top stitching on the bottom panel just the way I did for the exterior. Now I also want to show you that I have one of the sides pinned in here, clipped in here, okay? So when you sew this, you're going to sew it from the side panel side, and you're going to start out with a 1/2 inch seam. And then as you get towards the bottom, you're going to increase that seam allowance to 5/8 of an inch as you sew across, and then you'll start back up, and as you start to taper back up, you want to taper it down to a 1/2 inch again towards the top. So again, sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, maybe till around here, and then you're going to increase it to 5/8 of an inch around the curve, across the bottom, around the other side of the curve, and then when you get to here, start tapering it down to 1/2 of an inch seam allowance again. We're up to a really exciting step. I always love when I get to this point. We're going to be sewing the lining to the exterior. But before we do, you need to open this pocket up. Okay? Open that up all the way. Now, you want your lining to be wrong side out. And I have the exterior here. The exterior needs to be right side out. Okay? Now, this is the back of my bag. And I want the back of my bag to be up against the zipper pocket right there. Okay? So tuck down your closure straps and your handles. Make sure everything is tucked down, and then you're going to take this bag, the outer bag, and you're going to slip it inside of the lining. Okay? And then what you want to do is first, see, this needs to be tucked in here. First, match up all of the side seams, okay? So you got 4 side seams here. Clip those together. And I will clip all of those together first. Now I am making my seams go opposing, so I'm having this seam allowance go this way, and this seam allowance is going to go that way, and I put a clip right on top of them. Okay, then after you get all 4 side seams clipped together, then you're going to clip around the entire top opening here. Okay, so now just go ahead and clip the top edge of the lining to the top edge of the exterior all around. So now I have the top edge clipped all the way around, so the lining is clipped to the exterior of the bag. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew it. I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam all the way around, and I'll sew with a stitch length of 2.5. And this is important. Once you're done sewing that seam, you do not want to trim that 1/2 inch seam allowance down. You want to leave it at the full 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to start sewing. It doesn't really matter where you start. You can start any place you like. You just want to sew around in a circle. I'll do a little back stitch here. And this right now, this is the inside, okay? I'm sewing from the inside of the bag right now. Make sure your edges stay together. And here's where one of the closure straps is. I'm going to go over that a couple of times. Okay, and then you're just going to keep going around in a circle until you get back to where you started. So here's the bag with the exterior and the lining sewn together. And I'm just going to pull them apart, just like this. Okay. Alright, so now I got the lining on this side and I have the exterior on this side. And now that you have everything pulled apart, you're going to reach in here and you're going to start pulling the exterior bag through the pocket. This will not be hard to do because This is not a structured bag, okay? So you'll just keep pulling it until you get the whole piece turned right side out. And just keep pulling. Okay, so that was not hard at all. Okay, so lining side, exterior side. What I like to do also is put my hand back into that opening and just really push out all of the edges here. Okay, so you just work around, make sure everything is all pushed out as it should be. Okay, and I'm going to tuck this back in here for right now, and then the lining is going to be pushed inside the bag. Now, once you have the lining pushed down into the bag, under here is my seam allowance, that 1/2 inch seam allowance. That seam allowance should be facing up, okay? So up this way, and you're going to fold the exterior basically over that seam allowance that's in there, and you're going to flip it. So in other words, the exterior of the bag should be showing 1/2 of an inch inside the bag, okay? If that makes any sense. And you'll feel your seam allowance in there, which is a 1/2 inch. So you're just going to go around and clip all along the top, feeling for that seam allowance and letting that exterior fold over the seam allowance, okay? Clip it all around. So now I have the top all clipped in. The exterior is rolled in towards the interior of the bag by a 1/2 of an inch. So the next thing that we need to do is top stitch all around here, and the pattern instruction says about 1/8 of an inch. I might do 1/4 of an inch. I'll see when I get over there. But I will also top stitch with a stitch length, I think, of 3.5, because now with all the seams and everything in there, there is some bulk in there. Okay, so I'm going to start my top stitching. I am sewing from the outside of the bag, so you want to make sure that nothing is getting caught underneath there. And I'm also going to start in the back behind one of these connectors here so that you don't see where I make my join at the end. So I'm just going to go a few stitches forward, backward, and I need to switch my stitch length to 3.5. So you're just going to go ahead and sew all the way around this circle here. Okay, now we're back at the beginning, and you'll do some back stitching over here. And now I have pulled the pocket out of the the zipper opening here, and I just turned under the edges, and I'm just going to stitch across now. I'll stitch across with maybe 1/8 of an inch top stitching here. I've got my stitch length down to 3. And this just closes up that opening for you. And after you've sewn your lining closed, you can just tuck it back in there, okay? So this is how we're looking so far. This bag is a little bit of a slouchy bag because of the interfacings that I've used, but that's okay. I wanted it to be a soft bag. Now we are on to step 8, which is the female turn lock. So I have the half of the turn lock right here. That's the female side. This is the hardest part of the turn lock to install. Now, the way I like to do it is I have this little cutter here that I've got off of Amazon, and I'll try and find the link for you. It came in a set of cutters, but this particular one right here fits perfectly over this opening. Okay, so you can see there's the opening, here's the cutting side. You can see that it fits perfectly over there. It's the exact correct shape that I need it to be, and the correct size. Now, if you don't have this, what do you do? Well, what I like to do is we'll take a piece of scrap here and we'll pretend that it's a bag, okay? And we want to put the turn lock on it. So what I would do is I would take the flat side, okay? This is the side that does not have those raised edges up here, okay? And I would put that down, place it where it needs to go, and then I would trace the inside oval, okay? And I would also trace the little holes that are there. And then I would take a pair of very sharp scissors, okay, and I would clip right in the center of that oval, okay, and I would clip all the way to that circle on that side, and then I would clip to the circle on this side, and then you would have to clip around that oval. So from here I will clip diagonally over to that edge of the oval right there. Okay. And then I would clip down to the other side of the dot. And then again I'm going to clip in diagonally to this side of the oval, and then back to the dot on the other side. Then you would have to test it. You would take this piece, the part that has the raised edges on it, and you would put that in between here, okay? Put it right through the opening. And then you have to see if your opening is the correct size, all right? It has to be able to fit in here without seeing any of the fabric edges, all right? So you would test it, see how it fits, you know, like that might work. If it's not the right size, then you would have to go and trim a little bit more. But it's a little bit of a tedious process, and there's some trial and error in here, okay? So if you're able to get this set that this piece comes in, it's much, much easier to do. So, as I said, I already have my marking here for where this needs to go, and I want to take my cutter and center it right over the crosshairs, okay? I have this mat here. I'm going to put this underneath so that I don't hurt anything. And I'm also going to have to fold this part back, the back, because that's sticking up and it's going to be in the way. All right, so I'm folding everything back, and I'm putting my little cutting mat underneath there. And then I'm going to take this cutter and I'm going to center it over the crosshairs. And then I have my hammer. I'm just going to hammer it. until it cuts through. You can see I'm partway cut through here. Now, if you have a press, like a rivet press with flat plates on it, you can actually just do this right in the rivet press. You don't have to do any hammering. Okay, and here's the piece on the back. Okay, so now I have the hole cut clean through, and I can take the part that has the raised edges here, and you can see it's going to fit right in there perfectly. All right, now the other thing that I need to do is get the placement for the screws. So what I'll do now is take the half that does not have those raised edges on it, and I'll place it over that opening, and I'm going to mark where I need to make these little holes. And I actually punched those out with my hole puncher. But I'm going to do it from this side because I would not be able to see my markings for where those holes go on the dark fabric. So I place this over. Okay, and I'm going to mark one hole here and then one hole on the other side, and those dots are where I need to punch the holes out. So now I'm going to punch these holes. What I want to do next is take some fray check. I'm going to go over all of these edges here with my fray check. On both sides. Okay. Now I brought you in closer so that you can see a little bit better what I'm doing here. The part that has the screw holes in it, that goes on the inside of the bag, okay? And the part with the raised edges goes on the outside. So first let's put this on the outside of the bag here. I'm going to turn this over like this and get everything to be flat on my table. And I'm looking for my screw hole, which is right here, okay? So I'm going to take this side and I'm going to place it on top. Now you can put a little bit of glue or fray check in that hole if you want to. That's going to help hold the screw, lock the screw in place. So let's do that, just a little dot of fray check. Then I'll put the screw in, and then I'm just going to screw it down. I'm not going to make it super tight to start. Just want it to catch. And then I need to move this around so that I can find the screw hole on the other side, and it's right there. So I'm just going to get it into position. There's the screw hole. I'll put in a little dot of fray check again. And I'll take the other screw, put it right down in there, and I'll just screw it down until it catches. Okay? And once I know that it's caught on both sides, and I can see from both sides that there's no fabric showing through there, it's all nice and clean looking, then I'm going to go in, I'm going to tighten these up quite a bit. Now, if you want, you can get some fabric glue instead of the fray check, and you can put the fabric glue underneath both of these pieces, okay? And that that really does help quite a bit with keeping the lock secure and in place exactly where it needs to go. All right. This is how I usually do mine. I've never had one come out. So the fray check works well. The fray check is like a glue. All right, that's in there pretty tight now. All right, so there you go. That's what it looks like. Now, the way this closes is this exterior front goes over the lock here and closes. Okay? Now we're on the last step, which is to create our shoulder strap. So you're going to do this exactly the same way that you created the handles, only of course the shoulder strap is a lot longer. So you're going to take the cotton side and you're going to fold both long ends in towards the middle. Then on the cork side, fold in both long ends into the middle, and I have it being held in place with my tape there. Then after you've done that, you'll go over to the sewing machine and you're going to sew both ends together with the cork and the cotton together. Okay, you're going to sew those two pieces together on both ends. Then after you do that, you're going to fold in the cork side so that it's overlapping to the cotton side by about 1/2 inch, and you're going to start clipping the two together, both the cork and the cotton, with the wrong sides together. So here's the wrong sides, okay, and they're getting clipped together. And you'll do this all down the length, and then when you're done, you'll go over to the sewing machine and you'll do the 1/8 inch top stitching all the way around. So you go up the side, across, and then down to the other side. Okay, that's it. If you need more instruction than that, then go back and look at the handles, because it's exactly the same process. So I just completed my handles. I put rivets at the end, and now we can just clip them on to the D-rings on the side. And then our bag is done. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed making it. And I do hope that you were able to sew along with me. Please like and subscribe.